Good evening and welcome to another edition of the Tom Murphy Show. We're back from a hiatus. We couldn't film while I was a candidate, even though I was unopposed, but we're back and this will be airing right after Election Day. Tonight, I'm happy to have as my guest Catherine Lederer Plaskett, the president of WCLA Choice Matters, to talk about her organization and what it does and how folks can get involved. Catherine, can you tell us a little?
Absolutely. I'm sorry it is after Election Day because our focus is elections. What we do is focus on people running for office or getting appointed to office. We send out questionnaires and to establish someone's position. With judicial candidates, we interview them. And we don't think you can be a little bit pro-choice. You can either be 100% pro-choice or you're not pro-choice. That's not a sliding scale.
Right.
So then we do something of rating candidates, and the WCLA PAC is our state PAC. And we work together with the state PAC, and the state PAC puts out the endorsements we make. And our pro-choice voters in the county, we have 90,000 voters in the county, get this in the mail.
It used to be pink, right?
No, never. No, that
yellow.
Planned
You're right,
Parenthood was pink. We were, and for a while they were trying yellow on, but we made it clear that that's our color.
Okay.
They used to be much bigger booklets, but postage has put that out of the question.
Okay.
It's not even the printing, it's the postage. So what we do is we send this out, and we have informational articles about what's going on. Back of this one this year is the 20-week abortion ban, which I hope we'll get a chance to talk about. But we send this out telling voters who they can trust with their reproductive rights. And what makes us unique in this day and age is we are truly grassroots, and that's where anyone who wants to volunteer, we welcome volunteers. Mm-hmm. We telephone and have always telephoned every voter, female voter only, in the county. And when there was still a Right to Life party, we excluded that group of people. Mm-hmm. But we call them and ask them basically a 4-question survey. And the first question is about their position on abortion rights. But the last question, the second to last question, check that the person is willing to cross party lines. If a candidate running in their party is anti-choice, would they cross over to another party and vote for that candidate if that candidate was pro-choice? And if they say that they would, then we put them in our database. And we don't ask for a penny. And that's what's always been a struggle with this organization. It's a phenomenal organization and the oldest one in the country. It was set up in 1972. And by putting them in our database and sending them these voting guides, you'll see women walking in to their voting booths with their guides telling them, mm-hmm. and they will vote accordingly. So we do it with a survey. We send out emails now that didn't used to exist, but now we send out a lot of emails. Trying to keep people informed about what's being done. Right. And this year we have a very intense county situation because people call it an off-year election. We don't consider any election year an off year. You should be voting all the time.
And your county representatives do have a lot of input into choice situations and women's health care situations.
You know, that's what I love about you, Tom. You actually know that.
I do.
Many people don't realize that. And they don't understand. It took a long time under our county executive, who was Andy Spano, to get birth control for women as county employees covered. Right. But we did, and we got in the women's office, and then the commissioners who we were concerned about who was going to be appointed to head up healthcare, we made sure that we had a commissioner and we had policies in place so that people who were inmates, actually, if they wanted to terminate a pregnancy, they could, if they got STD testing. Sadly, under this administration and under some of the county legislators, all of that has been pushed aside. And where the budget, we used to have a wonderful way of dealing with the budget in community health centers. Mm-hmm. We had the most anti-choice, rabidly anti-choice county legislator put in charge of the budget. It's not so much of a surprise because the legislator who was chair, who appointed her, also voted with the other anti-choice, the Republican caucus and 2 Democrats voted to gut all the money to the community health centers.
Jesus. And this is where a lot of women of less means and struggling and poor women rely upon, not just for reproductive Pap smears, tests for breast examinations for breast cancer. So it's multifaceted.
I compare it to Planned Parenthood in Westchester.
Right.
This county executive already gutted the funding that Planned Parenthood had for sex ed courses, which were highly successful, teaching teens about responsible actions. It was highly successful. First thing Astorino did is cut that.
So that way, teens will never have sex.
Right. Only under,
It'll never happen.
sadly, the mayor in Yonkers funds abstinence only. So when one really sees that it's not a partisan issue, we are nonpartisan, and we see how it can be a bipartisan group that attacks women. And but back to your question about Planned Parenthood and the community health centers.
Yes.
In Westchester, the community health centers are the working poor, the working woman, the young woman's line of defense. You can go, if you're a family, you can go with your children. Mm-hmm. Your children can have their examinations. You can have your examinations. It's a wonderful facility. Yes. We have one in Greenberg and the Mount Vernon, and I believe there's one in Yonkers. They were all gutted by this group of
And they're providing
legislators.
preventative care, which we all know is cheaper in the long run.
Preventative care, and included in preventative care is birth control.
Right.
And that's key. I mean,
yes.
The number...
Especially if you want to lower the number of abortions.
People always assume that abortions are young women who went out and had a great night, and then, oh my gosh, I wasn't careful. Especially with emergency contraception now, that's not the case. Mm-hmm. A lot of abortions are by women who have 2 and 3 children, who say, I can't afford to have another child. My budget is stretched to its limit. And our county executive and these county legislators made sure that that budget was going to be stretched even more. And to show that they don't really care about the families or the kids, this had nothing to do with any philosophy like that, they then went out and made it impossible for many of these families to actually provide childcare for.
So the women could go back to work and get back into the workforce. Yes.
It made it too expensive.
I want to leave the county for 1 minute, and because there's been a lot of Strom and Drang in Congress about Planned Parenthood. But I just want to point out before to set up this conversation is that since the Hyde Amendment was passed a long time ago, you're not allowed to use any federal money for abortions in the United States of America. So people a lot of time demagogue the issue and say defunding Planned Parenthood has to do with abortions, but it really doesn't.
They have made Planned Parenthood the target, the symbol.
Yes.
They don't really care about the facts.
Right.
Planned Parenthood uses no federal funds for abortion. Out of the question. It's illegal. They don't do it. But the people prosecuting Planned Parenthood don't care about the facts, as we see from the video being used. That video was so doctored. And even today I watched something again with the filmmaker who said, yes, that was footage
I think it's from Mamaroneck, believe it or not. Well, I'm sorry.
Caught me by surprise.
Not all of our citizens are that.
But this person today said, yes, we know that wasn't from a Planned Parenthood, but it's the same thing. Well, no, it's not the same thing if you're using it to prosecute someone.
Yes. Or persecute.
Or persecute.
Yeah.
They're trying to do both.
Exactly.
And it's a terrible thing. And actually, the other part to this that is not talked about enough is that stem cell research, embryonic stem cell research, was passed by a bipartisan Congress. It was not a partisan issue. And now, as the Congress rolls further and further to the right, answering an even louder cry from extremists, they're taking it out on women.
Yes. And also, just another misconception is the federal government is not giving grants of money to Planned Parenthood. The money that Planned Parenthood is getting is money that comes from Medicaid and Medicare for providing health services.
That's right.
As if you went to your doctor and he accepted Medicaid, it's the same thing. It isn't like, there's $500 million that's going to Planned Parenthood. That's just billing back from Medicaid.
And today we saw Texas trying to not take that money. They have the actions against women's health care are so extreme.
It's a war on women. And I know we use that term and the Republicans demagogue it, but it really is a war on poor women.
Well, it is a war on women, and then you get pushed into the question of why, which goes into a totally different philosophy. But the fact of the matter is, since this year alone, Congress has attempted to pass 51 laws against women, against reproductive rights. 51. Since 2010, 283 laws have been passed in this country against women's reproductive rights. Yeah. It is though women having independence, and I started calling it a right and started calling it reproductive independence, because that's what it is. To be able to decide when you are going to procreate and if you're going to procreate is the key to independence. Yes. How can you go to school? How can you have a job? How can you take care of your children if you're constantly finding yourself pregnant?
Right. And you know, it just
I mean, not even constantly if you find yourself pregnant.
You know what? It constantly finds.
No.
And you know what? It's been pointed out, but I think it deserves being repeated, that most of the people who are trying to take away these rights are men. And they're trying to, you know, and as I think I heard a couple of candidates say recently, and it resonates with me, you know, these are choices that should be made between a woman and her doctor. And if you're not a doctor and you're not, a woman, stay out of it.
But we watch how they use it to ignite the Republican debate.
And raise
right
money.
And also the Republican presidential debate. If they can rally their forces, and we know from primaries that takes the far right or the more to the left people who come out for primaries. It comes up the whole other question of why we are powerful. Our people vote.
Yes.
We call them, they come out, they vote, and they are across the spectrum in what their other positions are, but they're pro-choice, and that's what makes, if you're truly grassroots, it is the only way, knocking on doors, calling people, mailing them, not emailing them, because how many of us get emails and you delete?
Yes, a lot.
Yeah.
Or goes into your spam file, or
I tried to explain and have repeatedly tried to explain, coming back to your original question about the organization and what is going on, bringing it to what's going on in Congress. Mm-hmm. An average woman gets up when she has little kids at 5:30, 6. That's when I get up. Mm-hmm. I make sure my kids have breakfast. I make sure they get to school. Then I go to work. Then I make sure that, hopefully the school has some after-school activity for the kids. Then you get them, you take them home, you make sure there's dinner on the table. You try to help with homework. Maybe you throw laundry into the washer if you're lucky enough to have a washer. Mm-hmm. And by the time you're done, you roll over and you're tired and you get up and do it again. People don't have time to print something up on a computer at work where they risk getting fired, or sit on a phone and remember which email it was that had the voting guide.
Right.
It is snail mail, and I swear we don't get anything from the post office for supporting snail mail. But this is the real way to reach people.
Yes.
Because you can take this in the car with you, you can take it to the kitchen with you, you can take it to the bathroom with you. I prefer not to think we're read there, but we may be read there. But people take it to vote.
Which is important. Yes.
And the people in Congress know that they're playing to their voters when they have this charade of Cecile Richards came and did a wonderful presentation on behalf of Planned Parenthood and was not even allowed to speak.
Richards' daughter, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Was not even allowed to speak. They kept cutting her off because they'd ask her a question.
They don't want to know the answer. They just want that 30-second clip of them asking the question so they could run it on their campaign commercials come November. And it's just such a charade. It shows such disrespect to have somebody as a witness and not let them answer a question.
Such disrespect.
Then they put up a graph that was just totally bogus.
Totally. And what do you think of it? You've never seen it before. Yeah. We aren't explaining it, and this now give an interpretation.
It had a y-axis but no x-axis. And it was like a eighth grader algebra student would have told you that's a ridiculous graph.
But these are the same people who are trying to pass a 20-week abortion ban.
Let's talk about that because there's a lot of controversy in that, and some people have mixed feelings about it. But I think that there is a real argument for why that's a bad law and a bad idea. And could you?
Absolutely, it is a law that will target women in their 30s and 40s who are having children. When you are pregnant in your 30s and 40s, the likelihood of having an abnormal fetus, something with a genetic problem, is far greater. And the older you get, the far greater it is. Mm-hmm. And being someone who had her kids in her 30s and early 40s, I can tell you, I had an amniocentesis with each one. There's something called the CVS that you can have earlier, but it does not test for everything that an amnio does and leaves out some significant aspects of what an amnio provides you with the information. So you can have an amnio at 17 to 19 weeks. And then it takes another minimum of 10, usually 14, a little bit more than 14 days to get the results.